This is the first time we're taping a cooking video in the Jovial test kitchen in North Stonington, Connecticut. So I picked a recipe that I've been making for a really long time for Thanksgiving dinner, which had always been a really special holiday for my family. For Thanksgiving, I wanted to get, just a really soft bun and something a little bit on the sweet side. Most of the recipes that I have with einkorn flour start with a sourdough levain, which is basically just a combination of sourdough starter or active dry yeast, water, and flour. And you mix that together about 6 to 8 hours before you make the dough. If you're going to make it with sourdough starter, you're going to take just 2 tablespoons of sourdough starter, but I'm going to show you how to make it with dry active yeast because it seems strange that you would start with just a pinch of yeast. But that's all you need to get this bubbling. And by using the dry active yeast as a sourdough levain, you're going to cut down on the total yeast in the recipe. So it will have that real sourdough type of flavor, but you're still making it without the starter if you don't have one. So I always use a baking scale because that's how I make sure that I'm always adding the same amount of flour, which is really crucial to einkorn baking because you probably don't know what the right texture of the dough is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a little bit wetter than you're used to. It's really the only way to ensure that we're baking with the same amount of flour. You're going to put in 130 grams of warm water and a cup of einkorn flour. For this recipe, I like to use the all-purpose flour, just as a little bit lighter than the whole grain. And you'll just stir that up till it be sort of like a wet pancake batter. Cover that tightly with plastic wrap and let that rest for about 6 to 8 hours. When you wake up in the morning, it'll be bubbly and you'll be ready to bake. If you're using an einkorn sourdough starter and you let this rest for 6 to 8 hours, it's ready to use in your dough the next morning. If you're using active dry yeast, once this has bubbled up, you're going to add 1/4 teaspoon more before you mix up the dough, and that's what you're going to need to make your dough rise. So instead of using the standard 2 teaspoons of yeast, you're only going to be using 1/4 and a pinch. This is going to be a really simple dough with a little bit of milk, sugar, and butter to make it really soft. And there's going to be the addition of sweet potatoes. You want to pick the garnet sweet potatoes that are really, really that deep orange color inside. You'll need 1.5 pounds raw, and you'll bake this in the oven at 375 for about 75 minutes until they're nice and soft. Puree these with either potato ricer or pass them through the food mill with a medium-sized hole, and then when they're still warm, you're going to add 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter. So I've got the sourdough levain in my big bowl. I'm going to add the pureed sweet potato that I've mixed with the melted butter. Stir that up. I'm going to add 1/4 cup of whole milk. You can also use a non-dairy milk if you don't eat dairy. And you can use an alternative to the butter. Like, you could use extra virgin olive oil, but to get it softer, a spectrum spread, like a shortening, would be better. I'm going to beat in 1 whole egg and 1/2 cup of sugar and mix in 1 teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. If you don't have apple cider vinegar, you can use a white wine vinegar or red wine vinegar, and it's not necessary. It just kind of balances a little bit the sweetness of the potatoes. 2 teaspoons of fine sea salt and 6 1/4 cups of all-purpose einkorn flour, which is a lot of flour. This is a large amount of dough. It makes 16 really big rolls. You can also make twice as many with the same batch. They'll just be a little bit smaller, kind of like about a 3-inch dinner roll. And you'd reduce the baking time from 22 minutes to about 15 to 17 minutes. Once the ingredients are pretty well incorporated, then you're going to need this on your countertop. We always use these marble countertops because they're really nice with the sticky einkorn dough, because the marble kind of absorbs some of the liquid and helps with shaping and kneading. So you're basically kneading this dough just for pretty much under a minute. You don't want to overwork the einkorn dough because the gluten is really weak. This is pretty much how it ends up. The rising times are just, a reference. So if it's really cold in your kitchen, if you're using a new sourdough starter, if it might be damp or humid out, those times can change. They could be longer. If it's really hot in your kitchen, it could be shorter. But when you add eggs and sugar and fats to einkorn doughs, they take a little bit longer to rise. So this has been rising for quite a while. This is what this dough will end up doing, pretty much doubling. I'm going to turn out the dough, lightly flour my counter. I don't want to add a lot of flour to the rolls. So that's where it kind of gets confusing and why it's interesting to come to one of my cooking classes, because you can see these textures. This would make 16 rolls. So I'm going to divide up the dough in 4 pieces. And then divide each piece in 4. Really lightly dust your surface because you want the dough to stick to the counter like this, so that it helps you get the bun nice and tight. So I'm going to roll this out on the floured counter. In the beginning, the dough won't stick to the countertop, but as the dough absorbs the flour, then you'll get that sticking, which is going to kind of hold it together. So flatten it out a little bit because it's going to pop up really nicely in the oven. Put that on parchment paper on a buttered baking sheet. So here are the freshly baked buns. They're really nice and light. They have a beautiful golden color. These are really, really great for your Thanksgiving dinner. Serve with a little bit of butter in a bread basket. You can warm them up right before you put them on the table. They're also excellent for your leftover turkey sandwiches the next day. They'll stay fresh for a couple of days. My family really likes to toast them and put butter and honey on them for breakfast the next morning. I would recommend, since you probably won't have a lot of space in your oven right before dinner, to bake these a couple days ahead of time and freeze them in a sealed Ziploc bag. Then take them out in the morning, let them defrost open on a cooling rack, and then just pop them in the oven 350, 5 to 10 minutes, and serve them nice and warm. I think it's really great to have einkorn back at your table at Thanksgiving. I hope your guests will enjoy this, this new grain. You can actually be an ambassador to the grain. When they say, oh my God, this is the best sweet potato bun I've ever had, you can tell them how you made it and what a great story it is that einkorn has come back to life. So happy Thanksgiving and happy baking.